Welcome to Indy Unplugged, the podcast that's your front row seat to the real talk of Indianola. I'm Aaron Young, your friendly neighborhood host, and we're diving deep into unfiltered stories, candid chats, and the nitty-gritty of our vibrant city. Think of this as a crash course in all things Indianola. No fancy jargon, just real conversations. So, get comfy, hit that play button, and let's explore the heart and soul of our community together on Indy Unplugged. All right, welcome back to another episode of Indy Unplugged, a City of Indianola podcast. And I gotta tell you, it's been a minute since we've done one of these. It's been a few months, actually. So I apologize for the lack of churning out content. We've been focused on a number of other things that are happening across our departments and across our community. So I'm glad that we're able to get back and churn out a new episode of this podcast. And today's guest, we have a wonderful, wonderful community leader who was actually just recently appointed as the new mayor of Indianola, and I'm talking about Indianola Mayor Steve Richardson. Mayor Richardson, how are you doing today? Thanks for so much for hopping on today.
I'm doing fine. I apologize, too, for a poorly planned vacation that we took just a couple days after the last meeting of the council and my selection as mayor. But it'd been 10 years since my wife and I had 2 weeks alone together, so it was kind of nice. So yeah, well, you appreciate that opportunity.
Always have to have that R&R, and very much deserved to both you and your wife to be able to enjoy some time together and see some beautiful sights. So
yeah, absolutely.
So what does that sound like when you hear Mayor Richardson? What does that mean to you? And just kind of go through a little bit of your story of just your elected leadership.
Well, at this point, it's weird. To be frank about it, it's just it's different. It's been a process. I think I struggled a little bit with even putting my hat in the ring for the position once it came open, and for a lot of reasons. But the main reason is that the mayor doesn't have a vote in all the decisions, and giving up that vote was kind of critical, especially as we're bringing on a new city manager and doing a number of other things too. But more importantly, I felt that it was important that we have some continuity for not only staff but the community as well, and that continuity is more than just what we're doing currently. It's connecting the past with the future as well, and I think, as you know, Aaron, that and maybe some of your listeners too, and don't know this, but I have a pretty long history in politics in Indianola, and I kind of hate to use that word politics. It's just been how I look at my service to the community. My job for a lot of years carried me out of this community, and I didn't have the opportunity to spend time and give to organizations or, like the Rotary or different groups like that, or civic groups. And so my contribution was always being able to provide leadership in the city council or in state representative in the House of Representatives for 6 years. And so that was the way I kind of give back to the community, and that's what I see it as today, is still my opportunity to give back to this community. It's been great to me. And so I do feel that it's been important that I try to provide not only the historical content from the past, and there's been a lot of things that come up during council meetings, and I've had a lot of council members call me and ask me about, well, what was this decision we did 30 years ago or 20 years ago, or why did we do that? And I think that continuity is important, and for the historical perspective, but also a current continuity for staff, and the fact that a lot of our council members have less than 3 years on the council, and so it's been kind of good, and they've reached out to me in a lot of ways, and I appreciate the relationship with all of our council members. We don't always agree on everything, but that's okay too. So, but I think it's been important that we all have those conversations and figure out how to maintain as much as we can the continuity, and then move Indianola forward with the projects we've got going.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you really honed in on, especially during the interview process, but you've showcased it throughout your time as a council member and just your elected leadership, is you always want to make sure that everyone has a voice and that they're heard. And so during that interview process, you shared that if you send an email, I'm going to do everything I can to get you your answer or engage in that dialogue that same day. Just talk about that mentality and how you're going to continue to leverage that type of leadership style moving forward.
Well, I'll go back to my mom. She was mayor from 82 to 87, I think it was, and her perspective was that good government is everybody's business. And so when I was running for state legislature, she and I talked, and And I came up with the kind of the tagline of listening to you, working for you. And it's always been that concept of, Mom kind of honed in on that early. And in our conversations when she was running for mayor, she was very much involved in providing some hours at the office. She actually literally went into the office every other day or whatever the case was. And I kind of plan on doing the same thing, having opportunities for people to, stop in and chit chat or, actually complain or whatever. Back to your point, though, about trying to respond to emails and phone calls. My wife wasn't real happy with me a couple of days. I got some emails on a number of topics that we're going to probably discuss here tonight and in the council meeting and a few other things, and I tried to respond to all of those. I did have some text messages that people would not identify themselves, and I just have to be honest, Aaron. I feel it's important that I know who is texting me, especially on my personal cell phone. And so what I try to make sure is that I ask that person if they wouldn't mind providing me with a name or something so I at least can talk to them. I had one person that decided they didn't want to do that, and that's okay. I get it. But I suggested they email me or phone me or whatever the case is. I'd be glad to talk to them. And I do. I really see it as a real responsibility of elected officials to respond to people. They ask certain questions, and they have legitimate reasons for asking those questions. And so I feel it's really important that we take the time to respond to that because, after all, we're serving them. That's the important part, and that's what I've lived my life as far as politics have been concerned, is that I always try to represent the people. It's not about politics. It's about the people that you know and grew up with in this community and continue to live with in this community. And I really think that's important that we listen to what they have to say. And I think that's just aspects of everything that I do in my political career.
Yeah, and I think that stands true for all of our council members.
Absolutely.
I believe everyone ran on that principle of engaging with the community and having that dialogue. And I think, for tonight's council meeting that we're expecting right now, we're recording this podcast on that Monday, March 3rd. So this is in advance of this evening's council meeting. But, we're likely expecting a full room of community members to engage in some dialogue as we're talking more about budget and allocations and investments that are going to, whether it be community organizations or our own staff department level, to provide services across the board to all the community. And so I think tonight is a perfect example of civic engagement at its finest. But the question I want to hone in on before we dive deeper into some of those topics, Mayor Richardson, is from your time serving on council in the early 90s to kind of today's world, are you seeing more community members be more involved and engaged in those discussions with your local government, or is it kind of a slow ripple effect, or what's kind of from your assessment, what does it look like?
Well, I have to say that it's always been difficult for me to understand why we don't get more engagement at the local level. People get real concerned about what happens on the national level with Congress and the president. They get a little less concerned about what happens at the state level with their state senators and state representatives. And frankly and honestly, we have the fewest number of people who vote in our local elections. But those are the ones, the people that represent them in the city council and the county supervisors really have more of a direct effect on their lives than any of those other folks that I've just mentioned. And so, what we do directly impacts what services our citizens receive. You don't see that at the state level, and you don't see that at the federal level. You get some periphery in those things, but you don't get the direct actual having a number of police officers that can be there at your house when you need to, or the fire department or the ambulance. You call that and they're there within a few minutes. Those are direct things that we impact as council members because we have to make budget decisions and we have to make hiring decisions, and all of those things go into that. And I've always been a little bit amazed in all the times I've been on the council is the lack of community engagement, to be honest with you. Now, I understand people are on social media and stuff, but a lot of times again, I think that's a little bit of a peripheral engagement in the sense that they're complaining or they're praising or whatever the case may be. But to actually come to council meetings, I've been a little more impressed this last time around. There's been more people come to a lot of our council meetings, and I appreciate that. I really do. I mean, I wish we could have a council chambers big enough to hold 100 people, and 100 people would show up at every meeting, but that doesn't happen. Simply because I think as they get to understand the process, then they really understand where their tax dollars go and how they're spent locally. And you and I have talked a little bit since I've been appointed mayor about trying to get some documents out to maybe some restaurants and things where people are sitting at the table. And I realize people are on their phones today. But I also know that people still pick up the little piece of paper that maybe is in the napkin tray there, and they'll start looking at that and having some conversations. And I did that when I was in the state legislature. I took around a document I called Capital Comments every Friday. I always ask the restaurants, hey, it's not political. You want to read it? If you don't want me to put it here, that's fine. But I really would like to try to do that as much as I can on my own dime. I'm not going to ask the taxpayers to pick that cost up, but I think it's really important that we communicate as much as we can with the people and give them the opportunity. Listen, I list my personal cell phone on my city website, and on the city website, and people can have access to that. And I think that's important because if people want to text me or call me, but again, just please identify who you are so I know that you are from Indianola. You're not from, New York trying to scam me out of something. Not that it has happened. It has happened in the past. But luckily, I caught that at the time. But the thing is that it's just a polite thing to say, hey, this is Bill. I'm calling about this, and what's your thoughts, and be able to share those. And I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, so perfect transition into one of the topics that is being widely discussed amongst our citizens here in Indianola. The city is going through its budget process and having to go through some budget cuts, whether it be because of where we are with the amount of revenue that the city is able to bring in because of community development and growth in terms of our population, but then also in terms of inflation. And of course, the elephant in the room being House File 718.
Right.
For those who you have your first introductory conversation with regarding budget and specifically getting into House File 718, how would you describe that piece of legislation?
Well, what it actually is doing is trying to limit the amount of revenue that the cities have because cities rely heavily on property taxes. And so it's really important that people understand how much they actually pay in property taxes and how the whole system works. The problem we have is a lot of times people, and I just got back, as I said, from a vacation, opened my assessment from the county on my property, and my value went up. Then actually that would be more money in my pocket or my family's pocket if I happen to not be around. But the point is that you don't pay that on that tax rate that you see in those assessments. You only pay roughly about 47% of that as a resident. And so you have to kind of figure that in, and then the city only gets a portion of that because your whole total tax bill includes county. Believe it or not, Indianola residents pay county taxes as well, and the services that we receive from the county are probably not as much as one might expect, but the bottom line is that we still also pay county taxes too. So your entire tax bill includes county, city, schools, a number of other things. I had a conversation with one of our farmers in the area, and I told him that city residents pay the brucellosis tax, which is the disease for cattle, and he didn't believe me, and I had to take my tax form over to him and say, listen, this is how here it is right here. We do pay a tax for cattle, and so there's all kinds of little things on there too. But the city portion of that tax, House File 718, has severely limited the revenues the cities have. And what that means is you have different funds in the city, and the basic fund we call is a general fund. That's a fund that covers a lot of our departments in the community. That fund is limited to $8.10 per $1,000 of valuation. And I don't know if you want me to get into the actual how to calculate that. I was thinking about doing that tonight on the council meeting, saying here's how you calculate what your taxes are going to be from the city perspective. But what that does, House File 718 requires the city that if you have growth above 3%, value growth, that you're only going to be able to capture about 1% of that. If you have growth from 3.1% to 5.9%, you're able to capture 2% of that growth. If you have growth above 6%, you're only going to be able to capture about 4% of that growth. The problem is that all of our expenses in cities, and families are seeing this in their personal budgets as well, that all of our expenses in the city are running anywhere from 5 to 9% increases, depending on what you're looking at, whether it's materials for roads or other kinds of things. Those are all running about 9%. And so then to limit our ability to collect taxes to cover those expenses is making it very difficult. And so we've asked city departments to make some significant cuts in their budget. And I'll sit here and tell you right now that we are looking right now at about a $1.8 million shortfall out of a $5.5 million budget. That's 34% of that budget because of House File 718. So the state legislature doesn't necessarily realize how that all works. Your personal calculation on that doesn't seem to be very much. I mean, when you really break all of that down, you're looking at probably for a $300,000 house, you're looking at about $2.25 per month increase or decrease because of that 810 file versus what we're able to capture now, which is going to be about $7.86 per thousand. That 24 cents doesn't seem like a lot, and that one cup of coffee that might cost you a month doesn't seem like a lot, but you add that up to the 5,000 residents that we have in the community and all the other taxes that go into this House File 718 as well, it's significant. And so what I will tell the listeners here today, Aaron, is that we still have about a $1.8 million hole even after a lot of the cuts that we've made and going to be making this next year. But again, I want to remind everybody that actually no decision has actually been made yet. We have to set a maximum that we can tax for, and then as we get that maximum set, we can go in and look at specific things that we're going to cut. And so I just want to remind everybody that tonight's meeting and a couple of future meetings here will only be about discussions about things we can cut, but haven't really actually done that yet, and that'll have to come down the road later as we get towards the end of the fiscal year, which is in June. So
yeah, no, that's a great reminder, Mayor Richardson, to bring up to speed for listeners who to kind of expect that timeline and just knowing that these are proposed cuts at this point, but these are still some difficult decisions. And kind of my next question on that frame of topic is, has House File 718 created for lack of better words, an us versus them mentality where it's city versus non-city? And I'm looking at specifically potentially at the aspect of for those types of contributions where, has this piece of legislation prevented or put a cap, so to speak, on how much the city might be able to contribute toward regional partnerships or other community initiatives that affect the greater good that all of us are able to benefit from for that type of high quality of life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, when the city has the ability to collect the full 810 levy, we were giving money to the Chamber, to Main Street, to Kyokota, to Balloons. I mean, we were giving money to a lot of different organizations. The balloon money and opera and other places like that come out of our hotel motel tax, which can only be used for economic development purposes, and that's a discussion we'll have in a study session tonight a little bit. But as far as the other things that we do for the communities, excuse me, those are going to be affected too. I mean, we have to, when you start getting down to the basics of government and what the essential functions of government are, people sometimes differ on those functions. If you really look at it, police, fire, water, sewer, electric, roads, those are kind of what people think is the essential services of government. But a lot of our citizens, and a lot of the citizens like me that have gray hair and that are older, think maybe that's just all we need to talk about. But when you talk with our younger folks, that's not the case. They want libraries. They want parks. They want parks that have things for handicapped kids. They want to have trails and roads and bike trails and the amenities that a lot of us older folks use. We don't really think about that as much. I mean, I walk the bike trail probably every day, some way, shape, or form. You'll probably see me out walking to uptown. You'll see me doing a lot of walking, but we don't think about that and see that as necessary. And the libraries, for instance, and things like that are really critical for young families. I mean, you look at the turnout that comes to the library on all of their kids' activities and their fun days and their dinosaur days and everything like that is just incredible. And we forget about that part of it. When our kids are grown and moved on and maybe aren't in the area anymore and don't have family close by, they may not be participating in those. And there's other things too, the functions and having the parks available for disc golf, for softball, baseball games, all of those kinds of things and all those kinds of tournaments that our families get involved with, soccer. That all costs money, and those are all things that a lot of our families and some of our older folks don't think about either. And I'm not blaming any demographic in our community, but What I will say is that when we are a community, we have to look at all of those things. People say, wow, we don't need a swimming pool. Yeah, we don't need this. We don't need it. Well, yeah, the honest answer is those are the things that attract people to our community. And those are the things that help us grow. And a growing community ultimately means that you can spread those taxes over more people, which means in reality, you pay less for the functions of government than you would if you just didn't have any growth at all. And those are critical functions, and people have to understand that. And it's hard to think about all of those things when I'm looking at my tax bill and having to write that check out and go pay the tax bill. But listen, I'm just like everybody else. I hate to pay taxes, but I also know that they go for specific things. If I had to afford my own security system, or I had to find my own police and fire and all of those kinds of things, you couldn't do that. So we share that as a community.
Yeah. So for those who want to learn more about, whether it be House File 718, city budget, and this process, but also if they want to reach out directly to an individual or a group of individuals to express their opinions and share their sentiments, what are the best ways, or what tips of advice would you give listeners to engage in that type of next step?
Well, I would suggest a couple of things. I mean, obviously, you're welcome to engage myself and our council members are all very good at responding to individual requests and citizens in our community. And I would encourage you to come to council meetings and listen and learn. But more importantly, I think what we can't control as a city is what happens at the State House in Des Moines. And I do want listeners to know I'm very active in the Iowa League of Cities, and I'm on their legislative policy committee, and very active in that organization to try to make sure that the legislation that comes out of the State House does not impact our community in a negative way. And I think that our citizens need to reach out to our state elected officials, whether you believe it's our state representative, our state senator, or even our governor. I mean, anybody that you can reach out to. I've been having some conversations, and we'll have a conversation tomorrow with the Director of Economic Development, Debbie Durham. She's going to meet tomorrow is our league legislative day at the Capitol. She will be speaking to our group ahead of time. And what people don't really understand here is that, and I'll be talking to her about this issue, but what folks don't understand is that when we cut back our budgets, and all cities are doing this, it's not just the big cities, but when we cut back our budgets and we don't do capital projects like roads, or we don't put in new sewer or new streets, or we don't do some grading that needs to be done, or those kinds of things that are important for our community, that means those businesses that provide those services don't have the ability to pay their employees and have work. And so what we're finding, and what I'm hearing from developers, and I'm hearing from construction companies that deal with roads and underground like sewer and water and all of those kinds of things, I'm hearing that their next year's budgets, so to speak, are really in disarray because they don't have the backlog that is out there right now, because cities aren't going to spend any money. They're dropping all of these projects from their budgets because they can't afford it. And we are the same way. We've dropped a lot of our capital improvement plans for next year because of the budget. And so that affects those jobs, and it affects the ability of us to grow as a state economically. I also want to mention one other thing too. We are going to weather this as a community. It will be tough, but we'll weather it. But what do you do if a small town like Lacona, for instance, that maybe has one person that does the roads, does the water, does the sewer, does all the maintenance, all of those things, and they maybe have a clerk that comes in one day a week, and they maybe pay their council members $30 a meeting for coming to a council meeting? What do you cut? I mean, when you have no ability to pay the increase in fuel costs, you don't have the ability to buy the materials for your roads that now are 10% higher than they were a year ago. What do you cut? I mean, you can't cut out that one person that's doing everything for your community. Do you ask volunteers? And they have, a lot of them have volunteer fire departments. How do you buy new fire equipment? I mean, there's just nothing left to cut. And so what House File 718 is doing, Aaron, is it's hurting at large cities, but really who it's hurting are those smaller communities of less than 5 or 1,000 people to 500 people and smaller, because there's nothing left to cut. I was at a meeting last September in Sioux City with the Iowa League of Cities, their annual conference, and I sat at a table with 3 city clerks from northern Iowa. I believe one was from Odebolt. I think one was from Wesley, Iowa, smaller towns, much smaller towns. And that was their message in September. And that was almost a year ago now. And it hasn't gotten any better, and it's going to get worse. We've got 3 more years of this under House File 718. It was a 5-year plan to cut to cut taxes for residents. But in reality, it's really hurting the larger economic growth of the entire area and also of the state of Iowa. And that's what I don't think our legislators understand.
And I think also, furthermore, I mean, the ripple effect that is caused, you think of one cut that is impacted from whether it be a city department or a community initiative, and just that ripple effect it has where it gets deeper and deeper, and that impact gets greater and greater. And it all starts, at that forefront of being able to have that conversation with your legislators. You did invite some of our local, or rather our state representatives who represent Indianola at both the House and our senators to have a property tax panel discussion. That was back in early January, but it ended up getting canceled.
It did.
Why was it canceled?
Well, mainly because of lack of response from our state legislators. We had... I had invited all of the communities in Warren County and Warren County itself, the people from the county administration to attend. We were going to have it out at the Park and Rec building. We were kind of expecting maybe somewhere around 40, 50 people. And I invited school district people. In fact, I even invited folks from Marion County over because part of the legislative districts run into Marion County. We had some pretty good response for a few of the communities. A few of the communities did not respond, and that's okay. I understand that. But state legislators, I couldn't get a commitment out of any of them to be there. And so I didn't want to have something where we were all meeting and discussing things but not having some input into those folks. And so I'm not blaming anybody. I realized schedules, and it was in January just before the session started, and I realized that they're all busy, and I'm not laying blame on anybody, and they may have had busy calendars. We started this back probably at the end of November, early December, and they may have already had, things on their calendar that precluded that. But I hope to have our state legislators invite them in again to a city council meeting. If nothing else, I would really love to have them come in and talk to cities, school, and counties and folks and have a conversation. Those are tough conversations. And I was a state legislator for 6 years. I attended every city council meeting that I represented at least one time, opened myself up to any question they had. I attended school board meetings at least one time of all the school districts I represented. And I have to tell you that the first time I walked into the Norwalk City Council meeting, and I had talked to the city administrator like a day before, and I said, "Hey, I got some free time. Do you mind if I come to the meeting?" He goes, "No, fine." And I don't know if he told him I was coming, but it's like, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, hey, I'm just here to listen. If you got questions for me, I'd love to take questions." And so during their public comment time, they peppered me with questions, which was perfectly fine, and that's what I wanted. And then we got it on a regular schedule and put it in and had opportunities to do that. But no, I only had to represent 3 cities at that time. It was Norwalk, Carlisle, and Indianola, and I attended all of those meetings and school board meetings. And as a person that represents folks, if you don't sit and listen to people and listen to their perspectives, you don't get an opportunity to really understand who you're representing. And it was a great opportunity for me. And I just would encourage our state legislators to do that. Yeah, you're going to get a tough question or two, but the bottom line is that's what you're there for. Yeah. You're there to listen to people.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you said it earlier, working better together, and that
Yes.
includes at all levels from both the local and the state level.
And that's one thing you wanted me to talk a little bit about what some of my goals are. And my goals are literally to work, Supervisor Erickson and I have had a lot of conversations since she has taken that position, and we've had text and emails back and forth, and it's been very productive. I appreciate that connection. I always had a good relationship with Aaron DeCook when he was on the supervisors before, and Crystal McIntyre as well. And I apologize for not knowing the other two as well as maybe I should, and I'll hope to have an opportunity to do that. I've already had conversations with some of the city administration in Norwalk and hope to meet with the mayor of Norwalk and the mayor of Carlisle here shortly. Would invite anybody else, if they're mayor of Milo or anybody else wants to come, or Martinsdale, I'd love to have them too and just have a conversation about things we see and what we're doing. And I will encourage whoever we hire as a new city manager to meet with those folks as well. What comes out of this a lot, Aaron, is this: opportunities to share services. If we can find ways to share services with Norwalk or Carlisle or the city of or the school district, Indianola School District, or the county supervisors, whether it's personnel, whether it's equipment, whether it's facilities of some type, I'm all in. If we can do that and provide all of our tax-paying citizens an opportunity to reduce the cost of doing business as a city or a county or a school district, I'm in. So that's one of my goals, is when we're talking about goals, is to try to figure out ways that we can share services. We did that in the 1990s. We have a plaque in City Hall that says we received from the Iowa League of Cities 1993 award for a community project, which was our joint fuel facility, which included at that time and still does to a part this day, the city of Indianola, the Indianola School District, and Warren County. We buy fuel jointly. We get larger discounts because of the bulk fuel that we buy. We have the facility on North 6th Street. That will have to be moved eventually because that development of that area hopefully will be more of a residential commercial area. But the bottom line is, right now, I believe, if I saw the numbers correctly, we're paying about $1.94 for gasohol for our city and school and county vehicles. I think diesel is running about $2.40, if I remember. My numbers might be a little off, but that's the rough number. So you can see the savings that we're having. I remember the first year we did that in 1993 for the city of Indianola alone, it was a $62,000 savings, and I know that's just gotten bigger as time went on. But that's been going on now for 30-some years, 32 years, and we hope to continue that, at least with the school and the city, because the county's moving south of town. But I hope that we can maintain that and continue to serve the citizens with that thing. Another thing that came out of that, Aaron, was the fact that we are self-funding our health insurance as a city of Indianola. We started that with Norwalk and Carlisle. For whatever reason, I don't know the history. I was out of the city politics for a number of years there. I don't understand the history between why Norwalk and Carlisle dropped out of that. But we have a very healthy self-insurance fund right now that allows us to have lower insurance rates because of that. And so we are saving taxpayer dollars by doing those things. Anything that we can do, whether we can share personnel, whether we can do those kinds of things, those are the things that happen when you have a tight budget and can look at opportunities. Everything's on the table, and I would welcome any opportunities we could do with that.
And finally, I think one of those things that are definitely on the table, as we kind of examine this dynamic plan that currently called Indianola Vision 2030 with all the moving pieces and intricacies, what kind of update are you able to give listeners right now where things currently stand, especially as we're talking through some of these budget discussions as well?
Well, it's tough because we don't have the ability to borrow a lot of money right now, and we don't want to borrow a lot of money that is going to cost taxpayers 20, 30, 40 years out in the future. So I think it's going to be baby steps. It's not going to be things that you're going to see, big, huge buildings that we're going to ask for bond issues on, or we're not going to do those things. I think it's going to be baby steps to start with. We do have the Regions building. Regions Bank is moving out sometime this month. The question then is, what do we do? Do we start looking at some renovation of that current facility and start making some baby steps of maybe moving one department or two departments out of current City Hall into a renovated Regions building? I have asked that maybe we take a look at the front portion of that Regions building that's right on the square. If we can horizontally or vertically create a separate property regime for that, so eventually the city could sell that off to somebody if they want to have a business or a wholesale or a retail facility there. I think those are great things we can do. I don't want to impede some of the progress that Main Street and the Chamber's having on those issues. But when we do move down the road, and whatever that is, I think it's probably going to be beyond 2030. But when we do move down the path of not having to use that building in the full extent that it's there, that maybe we can still put a retail business in there and provide some more services on the square. So we're trying to look at those things, but I think it's going to be baby steps right at the moment, and what we can do to maybe move one or two departments out of City Hall. just my thinking. I don't have a decision on that anymore in the council. Council will have to make those decisions, but again, I think that's probably would be somewhat of kind of a baby step that we could take and show people that we're trying to make progress and be responsible with the dollars we have and how we're going to use those dollars.
Yeah, and like I said at the start, very much remains a dynamic plan, trying to figure out what is the best solution across the board for all the departments, but also overall for the greater good of the community, which also includes, the business community, which has been offered an incredible seat at the table to really help generate some of these ideas and solutions to approach this full board plan, especially in regards to the Indianola downtown Main Street district. What could be the best benefit for both residents and visitors?
Right, absolutely, and listen, I was on the Main Street board for a little while because of things that have happened in the council and my appointment to mayor. It just seemed more responsible for me to move off that, let somebody else have the opportunity. But at the same time, I'm very appreciative of what the things that they're doing. And I do owe Eric a call this morning, and I'll try to get to that as well. But I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that the city's doing all we can. With that $1.8 million deficit, we've got to figure out something. That's 33% of our 810 budget, our general fund budget. That's a huge deal. So if you had a 33% hole in your personal budget, I'm thinking you'd make a lot of cuts in that and things you're doing too. So hopefully we can get through this and work through it. It won't always be this way, but I would encourage people to contact their state legislators, contact your city council members, contact me. If I can give you some help and suggestions, contact you. I'm sure you'd have some opportunities to talk with folks as well about that. But I think we, as a community, can move forward. I always said, and I said in my interview with the council, sometimes in your worst opportunities come the greatest opportunities. And so I really do think that we've got some opportunities now to look at some ways that we can continually save taxpayer dollars, like the joint fuel facility that's been going on for 30 years. That's incredible. And the amount of money that we've saved. Our self-funded health insurance has saved the city thousands and probably millions of dollars, to be honest about it, because our insurance rates, run anywhere from 200 and some thousand on up sometimes. And so, just to save that over 30 years is just incredible. So I hope we can find opportunities in those kinds of tough decisions that we have to make.
Yeah. Well, Mayor Richardson, I just want to thank you again for joining me today. I mean, you're a busy guy. A lot of people want to talk with you, and you've got a lot of things on your plate and conversations to be had. And I'm sure we'll likely have you on well in the future. And likely, we haven't talked about this more in depth, but I know you will probably have another show where you're breaking down maybe council meetings or just more of the topics and discussions that are at the forefront that our community are facing.
Would love to do that. I'll be here anytime you want me. If it's early morning, late in the afternoon, evening, whatever works for you. Of course, you got family and you need to spend time with that little girl. So, but I'll be glad to come back anytime.
Appreciate it. Well, hey, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in on this week's episode of Indy Unplugged. Again, make sure you leave that comment, leave a review. That way we're making sure that we're able to hit the mark with each and every episode. Again, my sincere apologies. It's been about a month or two since we've been churning out more of these episodes for Indy Unplugged. We'll get back in the swing of things. There's a lot to talk about happening in our community. And who knows, maybe next time you'll be a future guest of Indy Unplugged.